Welcome class to the Week 8 presentation for ME150. This week we are focusing on Chapter 10, so the recommended reading from your textbook is Chapter 10. The highlights of Chapter 10 all revolve around one topic, workplace legalities. So let's dive right in and start by talking about hiring and firing. There's a term I want you to be familiar with, and it's wrongful discharge. And this involves an employee risks litigation if he or she does not have just cause. And remember, just cause means a legal reason for firing an employee. So there has to be some legitimate reason why the employer wanted to fire that employee. An example of wrongful discharge. A practice manager fires an MA and cannot provide a legal reason for the dismissal. That would be an example of wrongful discharge. There are many ways that you are protected from discrimination. So let's go through some of these. Belonging to a particular race or religion, being male or female even, or having a particular age or disability, you are protected from discrimination of all of those things. Also joining a union or engaging in political activity. Preventing the collection of retirement benefits, reporting company safety violations, that's the whistleblower cause that you cannot be fired for that, exercising the right to free speech, refusing to take drug or lie detector tests. Now, there are some stipulations with that. There are some situations where you could be fired for that. Another thing you're protected against is sexual harassment, and there are certain conditions when we use that term sexual harassment. So these conditions must exist for sexual harassment to be substantiated. So submission to sexual contact is made either explicitly or implicitly a term or condition of the individual's employment, or submission to or rejection of sexual contact by an individual is used as a basis for employment decisions that affect the individual. One last one on the next slide. Sexual conduct has the purpose or effect of unreasonably interfering with an individual's work performance or creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. One other thing I want you to remember for your quiz, if an employee is sexually harassing another employee, it can be used as evidence of just cause for termination should a wrongful discharge lawsuit be filed against an employer. So that is one of the situations where you could fight that wrongful discharge lawsuit by submitting just cause for sexual harassment. There are many federal labor and employment laws, and this slide and the next one can look a little overwhelming. We are not going to touch on all of them as they're in your book and you can read through them. I want to highlight the ones that are most important for your quiz, so then you kind of know where to focus your efforts for that. The first one in red, Wagner Act of 1935. This is a federal law that makes it illegal to discriminate in hiring or firing because of union membership or organizational activities. So that one is important to know for your quiz. Also, the term affirmative action. I want to give you an example of affirmative action. It does fall under that Civil Rights Act of 1964. That's not the part that I feel is most important, but I do want you to know an example of affirmative action. A nursing home administrator sets up programs to give preferential treatment for minorities. This is being done because the current workforce at the nursing home is predominantly white. That would be an example of affirmative action. On the next slide, again, don't get too overwhelmed. There is one wage and hour law that I want you to be familiar with, and that is the 1938 Fair Labor Standard Act. And this is the wage and hour law that provides overtime pay and also a minimum wage. So two pieces of information that's probably important to most all of us. And then we have even more laws listed on this last slide. You'll notice the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970. That's also referred to as OSHA. I highlighted that one in red because your quiz does focus on OSHA a lot, and we are going to touch on that in more detail in the next few slides. The primary source of information for OSHA standards is the OSHA website, so I highly recommend that you read through that website. It's also listed on the From the Instructor document this week as an additional resource for you. Again, OSHA stands for Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They're charged with writing and enforcing compulsory standards for health and safety in the workplace. So they help keep our work environment safe, and they help keep us as employees safe so that when we go to work, we're not fearful of our life or being sick or ill from working in that workplace. There are certain priorities in terms of workplace inspection that OSHA follows, and there's 5 priorities, and I believe this is a topic of your discussion this week, so this is important to know for that as well as your quiz. They are in order, so if you look at the first bullet point, that would be the top priority for inspection, and that's imminent danger situations. The second one is fatalities and accidents resulting in death or hospitalization of 3 or more employees. The third priority is formal employee complaints. The fourth is programmed inspections. And the last one is follow-up inspections. So those are kind of the order of importance for workplace inspections. A couple of examples. An OSHA inspector finds that a hospital laboratory is operating under unsafe conditions that could endanger the lives of employees. The initial action that would be taken place by the inspector is to ask the employer to remedy the situation. So if they will remedy it in a fair amount of time, let's say in a matter of a couple days, then they may go without being cited any further. If an employer of a business is told by the OSHA compliance office that they are subject to failure to abate, again, that term is failure to abate, then the business is subject to daily penalties. So it's one of those, if they were given the opportunity to correct the problem and they didn't, then they get daily penalties. So those can be quite hefty. You're also covered by Right to Know Acts. So many states have right to know laws. These laws offer employees protection from unsafe work environments, and these are some of the things that it looks for. Toxics or dangerous substances, employer duties, employee rights, and other health and safety issues. We're next going to focus on the OSHA health standards involving hazardous communication standards, or HCS. This is a written hazard communication program that every employer should have that handles hazardous materials. MSDS stands for Material Safety Data Sheets. That's kind of the old terminology that I grew up with, but these are required in businesses that have any hazardous materials. The employer must provide an MSDS for each hazardous chemical. The new terminology is SDS. So in the revision of the Hazard Communication Standard that was done in 2012, OSHA created that second name for MSDS, which is SDS, standing for Safety Data Sheets. You can use either, and people should know and understand what you mean. General Duty Clause is another one I want you to be familiar with. This states that any equipment that may pose a health risk is included as a hazard. Another important thing to be aware of is medical waste tracking. OSHA may inspect hazardous medical waste and will cite facilities for violations, so we do have to make sure this is on the up and up. All hazardous materials must be disposed of in a safe and healthy manner. So let's look at what hazardous waste includes. Most of these you may already be aware of, and you can kind of read through this list. Blood products, tissues, cultures, vaccines, sharps, of course, table paper with body fluid on them, gloves, speculums, cotton swabs, inoculating loops. All of those are considered hazardous waste. There's many more that they could put on here, so this is not an all-inclusive list by any means. Some ways to dispose of hazardous waste. puncture-proof, leak-proof, approved sharps containers, glass or metal containers for chemicals. I want you to remember that one because that one's not as commonly known, and your quiz does touch on that. So OSHA guideline for disposal of medical waste materials calls for the disposal of chemicals in a glass or metal container. Large quantities of water when flushing appropriate chemicals down the drain. Plastic or leak-proof hazardous bags, incineration, and then you have to make sure you're using a reputable licensed waste handler. That is very important. Touching on some CDC guidelines, these kind of go hand in hand. OSHA standards for medical settings and healthcare workers are often influenced by or associated with guidelines issued by the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control. So some of their guidelines are wear gloves, eye masks, gowns, and other protective equipment when performing such tasks as capillary puncture, phlebotomy, pelvic exams, minor suturing, and throat culture. Wear protective equipment when performing tasks that do not involve direct contact with blood, body fluids, or tissues in case of accidental exposure occurring. So the bloodborne pathogen standard is designed to protect healthcare workers against contagious diseases. And we're talking about things like HPV, which is hepatitis B, and also HIV. Occupational exposure to bloodborne pathogen standards mandate that employers must maintain a SHARPS injury log and involved non-managerial employees in selecting safer medical devices. So they should involve an MA or someone who's actually going to use the device when making decisions about those items. Also of importance for your quiz, OSHA has an ionizing radiation standard, and that applies to all medical and dental offices that have x-ray machines. So that's important to know that those are regulated as well. There's one odds and ends that I didn't have a really good slide to put it on, but I wanted to make sure I talked through it. Sarah is starting a new job as an MA at a local clinic. So this is an example. Under OSHA regulations, her employer must offer her the hepatitis B vaccine at no cost as part of her employment. So those kinds of regulations are to help protect us as employees. So it's very, very good information to know and to be aware of. At this point, it concludes the highlights of our material this week. As always, my door is always open to you, so please ask questions when need be. You can reach me via email at almost any time. And all of our information presented today did come from your textbook. So definitely read through the chapter this week, which was chapter 10, so you can get even more information on all of those subjects. Also, don't forget to have all of your information in terms of your assignments turned in by the due date, which is Sunday. Thank you so much and have a great week.